fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and the Demons gave their opponent a 6-goal head start, fought back from the brink, and then fell agonisingly short, going down to the Blues by the narrowest of margins. Joining me tonight to pick up the pieces of my broken heart is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Binman. Good evening to our listeners. And we're also joined tonight by Lord Andy Ronicus, an enthusiast of fair play and optical clarity, who will be providing us with some insights into the umpire's performance during this game.
Yes, for any listeners who do not frequent our website, demonland.com, we had a thread about umpiring, and someone asked if I could did he ask me to write a letter to the club on behalf of Demonland to see if I, as a trusted person, could sway the club into somehow then swaying the AFL into perhaps giving us a better some better umpiring.
It was an interesting concept,
but I don't think I could. I have that sway. In fact, I know I don't. Also joining us tonight to tell us why this loss isn't as bad as it looks is B-Man. Good evening, B-Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. Why is a 1-point loss when we're 38 points halfway down the third quarter not as bad as it looks? Well, it's a pretty impressive comeback, and I, for one, could not be prouder of the players and my team for that comeback. It just reinforced to me how good a team this is. I mean, as the three of us, we've followed Melbourne for a long time. 36 points down, 2 minutes into the second quarter. I could go back in the last 30 years, 30, 40 years and pick 50 examples of something similar that we end up getting beaten by 100 points. I thought it was a terrific performance, and of course it's really frustrating to lose, and would have been great to win it. But I just I could not have been prouder of the effort of the Melbourne players.
How proud were you in the first quarter when they piled on 5 goals and we didn't score?
Well, I mean, we'll get into it, but I mean, it happens. It happens. It's football. I don't know how have Melbourne fans arrived at an expectation that an opposing football team that everyone had gone into the match saying is a good football team, and Carlton are one of the contenders. It happened to Geelong down at Geelong, didn't it? Almost the exact same scenario happened to Geelong. Geelong were unbeaten and before they came into us. Everyone seems to think they're a contender. What about the Giants? The Giants, 3 weeks ago, people were saying, seemed to suggest the Giants were basically, the flag favourites, and it was, maybe them and the Gap and then the Swans and the rest. They gave up 4 or 5 unanswered goals on the weekend. Proud. I mean, I like the implication is that I shouldn't have been proud because they had a poor quarter. I mean, I'm not a fair weather. My pride isn't so So, of course, I wasn't happy with it. I wasn't a fantastic quarter to be sitting at the MCG surrounded by Blues fans. But I was really proud of the fight back. And, that first quarter wasn't great, but it actually wasn't as bad as it looked. And we'll get into some of the reasons why. And, but it happens. I mean, teams, they were remarkably accurate, the Blues. In normal circumstance, that's 2-3, 3-2 tops, and it's a completely different game of footy. I was less thrilled with the fact that they gave up the first goal of each quarter. That was a huge issue for us, and we'll get into that. But yeah, my pride isn't so porous that I'm going to turn up my toes after a poor first quarter.
No, look, I'm upset about that first quarter, and I'm not. It's not that I'm not proud or happy that we came back and we fought back and we played well to do that, but just put ourselves in that situation is...
Well, I was frustrated, but it's like,
I'm angry.
I wasn't not proud of my football club because
You're
a
not.
bloody good football team kicked 5 goals. I mean, it happens.
Yeah, I just don't want to see it again. Well, let's move on because we will talk more in depth about it. So let's get on with the reviews. And each week I do put the call out to our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. I say it every week. We do love the feedback, and we do reward our loyal listeners who take that time to provide those 5 stars by giving them a shout out on the show. And Felinophobe writes, Cinque Stelle. George, is that... that's 5 stars in Italian. I know you've been to Italy.
That's correct. That's correct. Yep.
It was, I'm sure I ballsed up the pronunciation.
That was pretty good.
I've been intending to leave this podcast a review for a long time, and now seems like the perfect opportunity. Many thanks for the work you three, Andy, George, and Binman, have put into this podcast over many years. The match reviews are thorough, detailed, and have given me a new perspective on football. Brilliant work. From a personal perspective, this weekend, and referring to the Geelong game, seems a good time to write the review. For many years, I have lived in the Geelong region, and their team has put us to the sword frequently. There have been notable exceptions, especially 2021. Living and working in the Geelong area, it's hard to avoid Taxpayer Stadium and their annoying supporters, most of whom are surprisingly nice people outside of Cardinia Park. Even from 20 kilometres outside town, a glimpse of the horrible stadium light towers is enough to trigger me. I will only attend that ground if bound and gagged. In fact, I believe I may be suffering from a medical condition, KPE, Cardinia Park encephalopathy. Balls that one up. On the advice of medical professionals, I've moved out of Dodge to move to northern Italy. The severe rashes, anxiety, and uncontrollable twitching necessitated a European reboot this season. To my delight, the Demons triumphed this weekend. It could only have been better if the margin was even narrower and the game was played at Cardinia Park. Keep up the great work, Felinophobe. Well, thank you, Felinophobe, for that fantastic Cinque Stelle review all the way from northern Italy. So keep that feedback coming. We really do appreciate the 5 stars on Apple Podcast. And please don't forget to click that write a review link and write that review, and as well as giving us a 5 stars, and we'll give you a shout out on the show. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and you want to leave us feedback or post a question or a comment for the show, post under our podcast post each week, or just slide into our DMs. We won't read out your full name on the show. We're available Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, and also on YouTube, where you can watch and listen to us. So search for Demonland Podcast to find the channel. If you want to chat with other Demon fans, if you've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com, sign up, and you can chat with other Demon fans from across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. If you want to join us on the air tonight and you want to talk to us about any of the topics we're going to talk about, give us a call on 03 9016 3666. That's 03 9016 3666. I'll answer. I'll put you on mute and bring you on when there is a break in the conversation. You can call that number during the week, leave us a voicemail, and we will play it on the show. If you're listening live, come join us in the chat room. Head on over to demonland.com/podcast. We are live every Monday, even though today is Sunday, and I feel like I say that all the time. We keep changing. But if you do want to listen to the show, we will be live probably on Monday for the next, probably for the rest of the year. Head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. Now let's get into the match review. In what turned into a gripping encounter at the MCG, the Blues narrowly defeated the Demons by a single point in a match that epitomise the razor-thin margins defining this very recent rivalry. 6 of the last 8 encounters between the two teams have been decided by under a goal, with the Blues having pipped the D's at the post in their last 3 matches. The Blues, leading throughout the game, built a formidable early advantage by scoring the first 6 goals. The initial burst proved critical, setting a tone of urgency and precision that the Demons struggled to match in the earlier stages. Melbourne's woes were compounded by a scoreless first quarter, a rarity for this current crop of Demons. In fact, the D's have not been held scoreless in the first quarter since 2008. It was also our first scoreless first quarter against the Blues since 1942. This slow start was despite frequent entries into our 450, showcasing a lack of finishing precision that's haunted them throughout the match, with the D's winning the inside 50 count 61-41 on the night. Christian Petrarca's strategic shift from midfield to forward in the second quarter ignited the D's offense. He delivered a standout performance, scoring 5 goals in what ultimately became a desperate yet unsuccessful comeback effort. Petrarca's heroics brought the Demons within a whisker of victory as his late surge in the final quarter nearly overturned what had peaked at a 38-point deficit. Accuracy in front of goal would once again prove to be the Demons' Achilles heel, ending the match with 4 more scoring shots and taking the moral honours of winning on the expected scoreboard on the night. The match climaxed in the final seconds with Melbourne captain Max Gawn narrowing the gap to a single point. However, Carlton's defence held firm, epitomised by Nick Newman and Patrick Quips' crucial tackle on Petrarca in the dying moments, sealing the win for the Blues. Despite the devastating loss, the D's demonstrated a capacity to challenge under pressure, qualities that should come in handy come finals time, but hopefully not too many head starts are given up come September. Anything else, boys, before we move on to the stats?
I think we'll cover it all off when we get to the questions, Andy.
So can I do my brief comments, Andy? I'm gonna give up my brief comments time after you sledging me last week about my non-brief comments. But
at the top of the show, so you've moved into your second brief comments.
Yeah, so brief comments. If you could play that clip from Goody, because for me, I'm going to take a leaf out of his book, out of Goody's book, and he sums up for me the entire game in the very first question he was asked at the post-match presser.
Right, they sort of cut into it while the question's being asked, but you can get the drift.
Bit of a weird game in the end. You guys trailed for most of the night and just found something late. How do you what's your main takeaways?
The main takeaway is you hate losing. You're going to wake up feeling pretty crook about that one in terms of how we started. Anytime you want to give a team 6 goals head start, for that contest, both ends of the ground was really poor and our defence was poor. So we gave a really good side a 6-goal start, and they played really well early. They were hot. But our responsibility as a footy club is to rock up and compete in a way that keeps you in a game for longer. That's where the game was won and lost early. And there was a lot to like after that, but the damage was done.
That it was.
All right, we can wrap it up now. That's
there you go.
That's basically my summary of the game. And we'll obviously get into the sort of starting stuff, but we really, I don't think we were that poor in that first 10 minutes. We just wasted our inside 50 kicks, as Goody just suggested, and I just felt like the defensive system was a little bit out of sorts. And T-Mac, I think he had he's probably not his best game for the season, and certainly, he was caught out a couple of times, and they took all of their chances. They were brilliant, let's face it. So what you mentioned expected score, but we'll touch on that later. But I mean, their kicking was brilliant. So our kicking actually wasn't that bad. We were bang on our expected score. They were 24 points above what their expected score was, and that's because they kicked brilliantly, and that happened in that first quarter. So I reckon Goody's got it in a nutshell just there.
Oh, you caught me when I muted and it just stood up, but you can go straight into your stats files if you would like.
No worries. All right. So it was a fascinating game again. So 2 weeks in a row, fascinating game. And I reckon there's there's an interesting element that links both games. We only played both teams once. So both sets of coaches will only get that opportunity to set up against potentially a team that will meet in the finals. And I think it's well worth considering, because there's a question later that we'll touch on about their centre square setups, and they were definitely really aggressive. That was definitely a part of a factor in some of their clean exits. And I think they experimented with quite a few tactical, both coaches and Scott as well, Goody in both games, and Scott and Voss, with tactics with a view to playing in the finals. It's really curious that we don't play either team again. And this is our chance, I guess, to sort of see how we match up on them. But by the same token, Goody and probably Voss, but definitely Goody will have kept his tactical cards pretty close to his chest. So I think the reason I say that is I feel like that in both games there was a fair degree of experimentation by Goody, definitely in this game. And I think with a view to trying different things going forward, but also, not showing our cards that we'll, want to show come, a must-win finals game. It was a really curious game on a number of levels, and you could really see the Blues wilting in the second half and us resting the momentum. I said as much to my mate at the game, and I even after we went 38 points down, I confidently said to him, I thought we were still a red hot chance to win that game, and I was almost proved correct. I think a key factor in the loss was when we did start arresting the momentum. They got a couple of goals straight after goals from us, and as I mentioned, those goals at the start of the quarter, those sort of goals really hurt. What was super impressive was most teams that lose their momentum. When you've got the momentum and a team sort of gets a goal against the grain, so often teams then fold, and then that's the end of the match. But that was one of the reasons I was so proud of our performance in that second half, because they didn't. But as ultimately, as Goody said straight up in his presser, the game was lost going 6 goals down. And I'd be guessing, this is just a pure guess, but in the history of all of the games of footy since 1852, whenever the first game that D's played was, I reckon it'd be no better than 1 in 30 for teams winning after being 6 goals down at any point in a game of footy. But maybe we can get that on the Twitter feed for, what's the fella? Swamp.
Yeah, Sir Swamp.
Sir Swamp thing. That might be a job for you, Andy, on the Twitter feed.
Yeah, but I don't know if he likes Melbourne, because whenever I've asked him questions, and he probably gets asked a million all the time, he's never answered me, but I won't take that.
Well, we'll see. Maybe that's an interesting one. But yeah, anyway, it's really difficult to win once you get that far down, and that's what Goody said. Before we go on, really, I just want to give credit to Carlton. I thought they played brilliantly in that first quarter. They were really switched on, and they were excellent defensively. I've been critical of their defensive work, and they were brilliant defensively, but in that first half. But I wouldn't, if I was a Blues fan, I wouldn't sleep on that too much, because they were terrible in the second half, and almost get, to give up a 38-point lead halfway through the third quarter and almost lose it. We could arguably, could have won it. It would have been great to steal a win. That was a pretty poor defensive second half from the Blues. It would worry me if I was a fan, but they were brilliant in that first quarter, and they won some critical one-on-one battles in that first quarter particularly, but also in the second quarter. And I forget, I'm not sure who was playing on Fritter, but he really gave Fritter a bath in that first 10 minutes, and there were a couple of critical contests, and I think it was Cotterill. Cotterill did some really brilliant defensive work, including that rundown of Cozzy that disrupted him just as he was about to run into an open goal. But as I said, really couldn't be prouder. One of the interesting things for me in this game was, and there's a question about the wet weather footy later, so I won't go into detail about that aspect of it. But this was a retro round for us in terms of game style. The first sort of 10 minutes or so, I don't know if you're at home watching, sometimes on the telly you can't see it raining, but I got there early. I got there at like 6:10. It started raining as soon as I got there, this fine misty rain, and it didn't stop raining pretty much for most of the game. I think the last quarter, maybe it stopped for a little while, but it was misty rain for much of the game. So it was really very tricky conditions, very slippery. It feels like to me in that first sort of 10 minutes, we were playing the way we're wanting to play, the 24 red and blueprint. That's the sort of model we were following. Lots of quick handballs. We actually did them all night, I thought. They in the first quarter, a lot of them broke down, but we were playing that sort of back half transition game in the first 10 minutes. But after the weather really came in, we really reverted to, it felt to me like it was the 21 to 23 model redux. So, and for me, that was really Goody adapting to the wet weather. We'll talk about that in a bit more detail. So last year, when we playing well, these are the numbers that we would look for. So meters gain, we were plus 236 meters gain, which is amazing considering we were down after the first, were probably level after the first quarter. We had 20 more inside 50s. and we had 8 more shots at goals. They're the sort of numbers that we saw last year. This one is even more striking. The first quarter was 53-47, then 50-50. Second quarter, this is time in forward half, I should say, 51-49 in the third. So that's sort of the pattern that we've been looking at a bit more so far this season, but it was the last quarter where we really dominated, and it felt really like a throwback to the last 3 seasons. The way we played, 76% to 24% in that last quarter. So overall, it was 59 to 41%. And we could have picked those numbers are very similar. I meant to check the last game we played them in the home and away, not the final. Very similar numbers from memory. In particular, that time in forward half was something similar, 75, 76 in the corresponding home and away game last year. So in many ways, it looked like the model that we've been playing the last couple of years. And I think it was Goody adapting to the wet weather and playing a different game. But using the metrics for the, with that in mind, using the metrics for the 24 red and blueprint defence, opposition score. As I said, I think defensively we were poor in the first half, particularly in that first quarter. We just seemed a little bit our structures were a bit off unusually. We got caught out a couple of times. And of course that's hard when it's coming out so clean out of the centre. So, and the question is, well, did enough pressure get put on that last kick inside 50? But nonetheless, we normally eat up those kicks, even when it's a 6-6-6. So we don't give up many goals from centre clearances. For instance, against Richmond, they had 10 centre clearances. We gave up 1 point. The Cats had 8 centre clearances. We only gave up 1 point. So, in normal circumstances, we don't give up that sort of score, even from a 6-6-6 clean centre clearance break. But it has to be said their kicking for goal was absolutely brilliant. 6 straight from the start of the game, 8-2 at half time. And on the defensive sort of side of it in their score, given they were 50 points at half time, we did super well to keep them to a total of only 77. They only scored 4 goals in the second half. That's an impressive defensive effort from us. And it really is worth noting the expected scores. I know it's not your favourite number, Andy, but they scored 75 your favourite data point, but they scored 75 points. So that was their total. They had 2 rushed, so 77 in total, but an expected score was 51. And our expected score was bang on. We had 3 rushed. We scored 73. The expected score was 72.4. So it was basically our accuracy was AFL average, which is impressive given how wet and slippery it was. It's even more impressive how, their accuracy was out of the park. Like that was one out of the box for them because they've been relatively inaccurate this season. It just shows you how much lady luck plays a part, but well played to Carlton. 75 points. We win that game on expected score, not because we were inaccurate, which was the pattern last year. We've mentioned those games in the Pies final, in the GWS loss in the Alice. Similarly to exactly the sort of conversation we're having about the expected score in the Brisbane game, Carlton won it because they were so brilliantly accurate. And in particular, if you go on the stats file, you can see their expected score from ranges, different ranges. Their kicking from 40 plus metres was sensational. Like it was, I think, 12 or 15 points above their expected score from that distance. And they really nailed some long shots, and particularly in that first quarter. Here's a heartbreaking number. On those expected scores, we would win that game 94% of the time. So that is a Melbourne number on that one that we've had to suffer through a fair bit in the last couple of years. But again, it was their accuracy, not our inaccuracy. And I think that's an important point. And all credit to the Blues for that. Good kicking is good footy. And you've got to pay credit for it. There were a couple of marks in that first quarter. They won to Martin. That's not a goal that we normally give up. That was directly below me. I was in the Shane Warne stand at the punt road end behind the goals, and they were all over the shop structurally on that ball coming into Martin, and to allow him a free run to jump over the back, I think it was over the lever, was a really poor bit of defence. You could tell how frustrated and annoyed Goody was in that presser, and it's no coincidence he named the sort of kicks inside 50 in our defensive and our contest, which I thought our contest wasn't so bad, but obviously in that first 10 minutes, Goody disagrees. So so I'll go with his assessment of it. We set ourselves to win this game, and he was definitely frustrated that we didn't. Marks inside 50 was a really interesting one, given Curnow and Mackay, and it looked like they were going to mark everything in that. In that first quarter. DeConing also took a really good mark, that Martin mark I mentioned before. But we actually, by the end of the match, we took 2 more marks inside 50 of them, which is pretty impressive given, everyone pumps up, quite rightly their forward line, but we ended up taking 9 marks to their 7. They only took 7 marks inside 50. So good defence by us, really good defence by us to keep that to 7, because I reckon it must have been 3 or 4 in the first quarter that they took inside 50. And almost that's sort of where the game went. Last week, we were +3 for contested possessions. This week, -8. And that's not a great number. That definitely wouldn't have pleased Goody. What's important is we were 10 contested possessions down after 10 minutes of footy. And which goes to the point that Goody made. We just weren't in that game. We didn't bring the heat in the first 10 minutes, and they took full advantage of that. But from that time, we were ended up pretty much level, or +2 for the rest of the game from there. Our pressure was just fantastic. It was brilliant. So even in that first quarter, I think, because of how efficient they were going forward, because of how accurate they were, you might go away thinking, we got blown away in that first quarter. But apart from that first 10 minutes, we really balanced up after that. And our pressure for the quarter was 186. Remembering 180 is AFL average, 200 is considered elite, and they were bang on 200 in that first quarter. Definitely, as Goody said, they brought the heat, brought the pressure, and they deserved their lead. That's for sure. They deserved the win, I think. Second quarter was really interesting, and I wouldn't have guessed this at the ground. We were 189, and their pressure dropped right off in that quarter to 163. The third quarter was nuts. This is a nuts quarter of footy, 217 to 209. And so both teams over the elite. That's how it felt at the ground. Huge effort by Melbourne. We really dialed it up, but they went with us. Credit to them. They went with us on that. Then the last quarter, and for me, this is just, this is a crazy number. And it shows that fatigue wasn't a particularly big factor in this game, or if at all. Certainly, the 5-day break, we'll talk about it in a bit. But 221 our pressure was in the last quarter. I meant to check. I think we've had 225, 227, but that would be probably our highest last quarter, and up with the highest quarter that we've had all season, which is amazing off a 5-day break. They were pretty impressive in that quarter too, 201. So for the match, it was 202, remembering 200's elite, to 194. Amazing game of footy. Our top 5 pressure players, and this is well worth again keeping in mind when we talk about the midfield a bit later. Number 1, 92 pressure points, 40 individual pressure acts. His season average is 61.6 pressure points, so we got 92, Jack Viney. That's just an amazing game from one of our leaders. Number 2, Alex Neil-Bullen had 32 pressure acts, 87 pressure points. His season average for pressure points is 53. So way, way over his season average for pressure. Fantastic game from Nibbler. Kay Chandler had a quiet game in terms of disposals, but his pressure was also awesome. His season average is 49 pressure points. He had 67 pressure points in this game. Coming in fourth was Clary. Clary averages 42.6 pressure points. He had 55 in this game, so another player above average for pressure. And Cozzy was fifth. He had also above his season average for pressure points, 27 individual pressure acts, 51 pressure points. His season average is 42.6. That's brilliant. Here's another indicator of our effort and intent and the contest that we brought to this game. Tackles were, we were plus 18. Last week we were plus 4 for tackles. We were plus 11 for tackles inside 50. This week we were plus 18 for tackles. So you can't question their commitment and their contest. And our tackles inside 50 were plus 7. We had 16 tackles inside 50. We only had, not only, we had 13. We were plus 11 last week with 13 tackles. We upped it this week. We had 16 tackles inside 50. For 7 more than they could manage, which they're just awesome numbers. another number that tells me really, like the pressure numbers, that we were fit and ready for this game. And I'm really, that's, again, I think we can hear in Goody's voice how frustrated he is because they had set themselves for this game. I have no question. Last week I talked about how this was a sort of anomalous or strange number. Our ground ball numbers are lower this year. Our contest numbers are lower because of the game style we're playing. But last week I noted that we were 12 down in ground ball gets, which seemed to me an anomalous number in a game we won. Much better this week, 104 ground ball gets to 106, only 2 down. We only had 76 ground ball gets last week, which is probably an indication, a big part of a manifestation of the way we played last week, all of those uncontested possessions that we had, uncontested marks. So there was just fewer, way fewer, 150 ground ball gets last week, and there were 210 between the two sides this week. And obviously, we played a different game style, but it was wet and slippery for the entire game. Our clearance numbers, our total clearances we were down 4 centre clearances. These are just raw numbers, not points from. So we had 10 to their 14 centre clearances, and we had 2 more stoppage clearances than them, 30 to 28. Last week we were +8 for contested marks, and this week they did really well in this space. And I think it was a factor in their ability to control the game, particularly in that first half. They had 3 more contested marks than us. I haven't seen the breakdown, but I suspect they had 12, and I suspect probably 8 or 9 of them were probably in that first half. Transition from back half, as I said, I think we played we reverted to the style we've been using over the last 3 seasons or so this game. So you'd think that would be reflected in the points from defensive half, and it was, but we still managed 26 from our back half. We're averaging 32.6 from our back half with a different game that we're playing this year. We're giving up on average 24.8, and they only managed 25. So we're +1 for points from defensive half. Score sources, so this is from the transition from back half, sort of key indicators. Season average is 43 points from turnover, 36 in the last Thursday night. We're averaging 39 points, and they can only manage 32. So that's pretty impressive in terms of our ability to stop them scoring from turnover. So that's a really critical score, is scoring from turnover and stopping the opposition from scoring turnover. So it was a pretty strong effort in that space for us this week. This one was the one that got a lot of conversation, a lot of talk, and the centre bounce scores. We got 2 goals straight from our centre bounce clearances. They got 5 straight from their centre bounce clearances, -18. But if you're going to focus on that, you also then got to credit our scores from stoppages. So around the ground, non-centre bounce stoppages, we scored 4-3-27 to 2-2-14, +13. So if we'd scored 7 goals straight from that, we win the game. That normally 5-3s are really anomalous, as I said before. 2-3, 3-2 we'd expect, or not giving up, more than a couple of goals from centre bounces. Credit to them. And I think part of that was how aggressively both teams set up in the centre. We set up for quality clearances. Both teams did. But +13 around the ground stoppages is a very impressive number. I'd be guessing it'd be one of our highest for the season. So for all the talk about our midfield, we're only 5 points down from scores from stoppages. So that was a pretty impressive effort in that space. Now, finally, the last one was fitness, as I've been talking about all season, and fatigue, the high performance stuff. I really think we were fit and firing, ready to roll in this game. I think that physically those numbers showed, we ran out the game really well, much better than them. We looked like we were rolling over the top of them, which is not to say, I was thinking about this during the week, is that, of course, it's not all physical. Individual players, I think, it's not homogenous across the group. Some players are going to be impacted more by a 5-day break and the training and the lead up. And I think Frid is one of them. He was out muscled a few times that he normally wouldn't. The other one is T-Mac. T-Mac looked, not nearly as sharp as he has been, which is hardly surprising 5 days. But the other factor with that, I think, is the psychological factor. I think it's easy to forget. They're not robots. So just 5 days prior to this match, they had a big game, finals-like game at the G that they were, pumped up to win. I think they were pumped up for this one too, but, that they weren't that's, I think, Goody's frustration we can hear in his voice is they weren't mentally, in the right place in that first sort of 15, 20 minutes. I thought they were at the first 5-6 minutes if we'd taken one of those chances. But there were some really poor entries inside 50 that really hurt us. But we get one of those goals and it's a sort of a different start to the game. But yeah, I just think psychologically weren't switched on, which is not to say, of course, a 5-day break is going to have an impact. But for me, it wasn't a sort of major factor in the result. But yeah, it has become a bit of a theme of starting slow, and it was definitely an issue in this game. I mentioned the expected score. That was a really, 54.5 is what they would normally score on average. So well played, Carlton. That you have to give them credit for playing, for kicking accurately. As I've said a million times, is good kicking is good footy. And that's it. That's it for Statsfile.
That's it. Stats Files out. All right, let's get into our listener questions. Now, we've got a number of questions about questions and comments. Oh, hello. Another number of questions and comments about the first quarter. Well, I've labelled it first quarter blues. But we've also got a couple of questions just about the 5-day break, and I'm going to roll them all in, so just bear with us a moment. Monocular says, once again, we came out and could not hit a disposal in the first quarter. This is becoming a habit. Is there an explanation? Very proud of the comeback, but just a bit too late. As always, incredibly thankful to you three for your usually calm and reasoned analysis. Palace D's agrees. The slow starts can be extended to the first halves. In the past 4 matches, we have kicked a total of 11 goals in the first halves and 29 in the second. 1 or 2 matches can be considered an anomaly, but 4 is a pattern. Can this be A, explained and or B, rectified? Smurf writes, slow start killed us, commendable fight back, but ultimately was our first quarter and inaccuracy that killed us. I would love to blame it on the 5-day break, but we had some run still in our legs at the death. Demonic Final Fantasy says, as everyone knows we lost this game in the first quarter, how can we and why do we go missing, panic and lose structure so easily? I suppose this is rhetorical and born out of frustration from seeing us unexpectedly on the back foot from the get-go yet again. The recovery, whilst admirable, becomes almost irrelevant under the circumstances, as that is what very good teams do, which we are almost. Travi14, a little bit more optimistic when he says, horrible first quarter, but to be an optimist after that, it is the best we have played in the wet for 4 years. Maybe Goody is learning. Would have been great to win, to get the win, but it's not the end of the world. I do think we need Hunter in the rotation, and once Bowie is back to full fitness, there is a bit more class through the middle. Not too worried by this loss. And D Old Fart is also not too worried about the loss. He says, I love the pod, guys. Always an important part of my week. Not really a question, but a comment. Our start versus Carlton was obviously deplorable, not helped by the free kicks against, but I was very impressed by the ticker and belief we showed in working our way back into the game and then ultimately running it down to the wire. In my opinion, this never say die attitude combined with a full list can take us a long way in 2024. It probably sounds like heresy, but this was the first time in many years that I haven't felt totally gutted after a loss. Now, the old fart, we've got to talk, mate. Because I wish I could share that optimism, but I could never not feel gutted by a loss, no matter how admirable the circumstances. The slow start and the arrogance of the team and the supporters that we played this week just made the loss all the more gut-wrenching for me. We should never have been, I said it earlier, we've never been in that situation where we have to claw our way back into the contest. And perhaps there are mitigating circumstances, which we'll talk about in a second, regarding our 5-day breaks and even the adjudication, those umpires, pesky umpires. But nonetheless, it does nothing to take away that stinging feeling. Now, I'm just going to go quickly to, got 2 on the 5-day break. Lazy asks, as a fitness staff, how difficult it is to prepare a conditioning plan for constant unorthodox breaks, e.g. 5-day break followed by 10-day break? What say what adds? Do you believe both the MFC and Geelong were flat to start their games this week as a result of the intensity of their clash the previous round? Lazy, I think you're going to have to ask that question to the people. The right people. I don't think we're the right people to question on conditioning. Better suited for Selwyn Griffith. But let's go back to back to the first quarter, George. Can our heroic comeback, where we almost snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, does that sugarcoat the horrific first quarter and 10 minutes in which we failed to score and found ourselves 6 goals in deficit?
Firstly, I'll preface this. I wasn't able to get to the game itself because of a COVID infection. So I was watching it on TV, which created some interesting insights that you probably wouldn't get at the ground, but you do miss a lot at the ground. Firstly, about the 5-day break. I don't think people really yet appreciate how taxing this is on teams that are playing a 5-day break. We've seen a couple of examples. Binman before mentioned the Giants. Geelong was another classic example, although they went off the 5-day or off a 6-day break on those old legs that they've got. They were 5 goals down in the first quarter and then 7 goals down at half time. They couldn't lift their legs.
It was amazing how similar that game was in terms of the pattern.
Absolutely, yeah. It was a tough, hard game that we had against Geelong, and then we had to back up 5 days later.
Okay, I'll just add, George, one sec. Carlton also had a very tough game the week before on the Friday night, albeit they had 6-day breaks, but they also had they had their third game in 13 days and fifth game in 26 days, which may account for why they died in the arse.
Yeah, but I reckon, sorry, George, I reckon a real factor is the type of game Melbourne and Geelong played. So it was a really low stoppage, therefore high kilometre run, lots of running, repeat sprints. We covered a lot of grounds, both teams. And, I thought maybe we would look to attack in this game, but maybe that's why we reverted to a more physical contest game of the 21 to 23, because we didn't have our run in our legs. And when we got on top, it was when we could bring the physical contest. And Geelong, that game, I watched that game, George, it was almost identical. In fact, one of the commentators said exactly that. They don't look like they've got any run in their legs. And that was 6 or 7 minutes into the first quarter. So I think, it goes to George's point about I don't think people sort of fully appreciate the impact of it. So, it was the Carlton-Collingwood game was a much different game to the Geelong-Melbourne game in terms of the impact on the players. We ran them ragged and we ran each other ragged, and they looked like they had more zip than us, the Blues. Most certainly they looked like they had more zip in that first 10 minutes. There's no question.
The other example was on the weekend. Fremantle off a 5-day break. In that game, in the last quarter, they'd kicked 2 goals, 13 and 6 out of bounds on the full.
Yeah, they looked a mile off an AFL team, didn't they? I know that there's the Cam McCarthy stuff was probably also a factor.
But kicking for goal requires that you're fit and healthy and not fatigued. Yeah. If there was ever a team that looked fatigued, it was Fremantle again off a 5-day break and even doubled up because they had to go from one side of the country to the other to follow that up. So watching on the telly, there was one really telling point for me in the first quarter when the shot was down the ground and Melbourne were in attack. And apart from our 3 main defenders who are sitting close to goal with their players, the next line of people in defence were our 3 mids, Viney, Petrarca and Oliver. They were trailing behind the play. They were completely shot. And unfortunately, their 3 opposing mids, Chera, Cripps and Walsh, were already down the other end of the ground helping out with the defence. They were well out of it in that first quarter. They just couldn't keep up the pace. The other thing was Carlton's mids, those 3, are almost sprinters. They're very fast over that first, in the first 10 metres or so. You can't say that any of our main 3 mids are sprinters by any stretch. They're tough inside, get the ball type of players, but you can't afford to give players like Chera and Walsh in particular 5-yard start. It wasn't surprising that they killed us in that first quarter with clearances out, because as soon as they got the ball, that was it. The delivery into the forward line was made very easy because it was unfettered possessions coming out in the middle. So our guys were being left behind. In that our mids were being left behind in that first quarter. It's not surprising to the result that came out. The other thing that was happening was that I picked up was Carlton actually play man-on-man defence. They don't play a proper zone. So even though we had more inside 50s in that first quarter, every single time the ball went in there, it was someone's right on their shoulder. So I thought initially, why are our players so far behind? I thought they were playing bad wet weather football again. It wasn't that. It was the fact that they never got a clean opportunity to mark. The other thing was that those three mids once again were covering the holes in front. So the Carlton defence was being complemented by their mids, and ours wasn't, unfortunately, because our guys just couldn't do the running. Just as equally, our guys are more. I've just talked about Carlton's mids being more sprinters. Ours are more long distance runners, and it was proven so in this game. Our guys just kept on keeping on for the whole game, and eventually it turned.
Do you mean our mids?
Our mids, yeah.
No, spot on. Spot on.
Yeah.
They're power athletes, not anaerobic athletes, and I think that's a super important point.
Yeah, and that will factor in more towards the end of the season. Carlton's mids have a habit, and it's been proven already this year, of dropping off. They get a good lead in the game, which is what they plan for. I listened to Cripps after the game. They intended to come in fast for a start, and that's what they do. They've got to get ahead of a team to be able to hold, and then try to hold them off. They're not long distance performers, so I think you'll see them drop off towards the end of the season because they just won't be able to sustain it, and that would be difficult for them in finals. The other thing that happened in the first quarter was a complete and utter stuff up. Max Gawn was off the ground for nearly 8 minutes. I don't know why. He went off at just after the 13 minutes to play and didn't come back on until 5 minutes 30 to play.
Because I reckon that was right, but he was smashed. He was totally smashed in a contest, and that's. I don't know if you noticed how. Maybe you couldn't on the television, but you were at the game, weren't you, Andy? Max was as angry at the footy, and I've seen him, and he was furious because he was getting smashed off the ball, and I think he got hurt at one point, and I reckon it was at that point, George.
Yeah.
No, know what they were doing to him. The Pitternet was doing that same blocking thing where they try to block him, when there's a kick out or whatever, to block him so he can't get into position. They were doing it all night, but physically blocking him, not just holding him.
Yeah, running into him hard, and he copped something, and I couldn't quite see it. I just saw that he was in some sort of, and I reckon it was at that point in time. There was some huge hits. He was an angry ant for most of that match, as angry as I've seen him, I reckon.
I've noticed he had a really strong go at Pitternet in that first quarter.
Well, because Pitternet just was right into him.
Him
and that mark, even the mark, or was it not mark, or the free kick? Was it a free kick that Pitternet got, or a mark that he kicked that goal?
That was a free kick.
Yeah.
Right, it was an absolutely ridiculous free kick because of how much manhandling Max had been getting, and I think it was because he threw him away. But it's
it was a free kick because it was punched out on the full.
No, not that one. The one that Pitternet kicked.
All right.
Early on, Pitternet had got a free kick. Max had got a free kick because of the manhandling in the ball in, and Pitternet kept doing it, and then Max got frustrated, I think, and gave away the free. Anyway.
So for the upshot of it all was that Max was off the ground in that first quarter for 8 minutes. That was 8 minutes plus time on. That's 8 minutes out of the 20 that is played just on the numbers on the screen. The other result was that JVR played the whole of the first quarter. Didn't get a break at all in the first quarter. So Max off the ground, JVR trying to hold it up, playing both full forward and ruck. It's not surprising that the Carlton mids got on top in the first quarter. What was really interesting for me was the change that Goody made at quarter time. A couple of things. Firstly, putting Petrarca down in the forward line because he probably couldn't run as hard as he needed to try and keep up with the other mids. If they're playing man on man, well, Petrarca man on man one will always win, and it proved during the game. Kicking 5 goals while he was up there, he's unbeatable if he's only playing got one person to beat. Putting A and B into the middle, and Cozzy and Sparrow, all of those guys are much better runners than what we had, we had, and that limited the effects of the 3 Carlton mids. Stopped their. It didn't stop them completely, because you can't stop them, but it stopped the free wheeling that they experienced certainly in that first 10 minutes or 15 minutes in the first quarter. So we made the changes, but when you're 6 goals down, it takes a long time to come back. We did, and it was fantastic what we did to achieve what we did in the end, but only going down by a point. But we were stuffed by the 5 day break. We were hit by Carlton, who were by any measure a good team. And they took
every chance.
They took every chance, and they planned to as well. Yeah. They planned to hit us real hard in the first 10 minutes with their speed. We couldn't run with them. We made the changes and ground them down in the end. So it'll be interesting come finals time. I think we'll see a completely different result.
I think that's a really good point. And I was, in terms of thinking through last week, that we might go fast, I think I got that wrong. I think that there's every chance, regardless of the weather, that we came into this game with the plan to revert back to our 21 to 23 model of forward half contest footy, because we figured that's where we'd be able to mitigate the impact of that 5 day break, and in particular how aerobically challenging the Cats game was. And as we saw, that's exactly what the Cats did. The Cats didn't run their way back into the game. The Cats physically tried to overpower them and got themselves back in the game, which is exactly what we did. It was really interesting that Voss he said in his presser that they, one of his answers to a question was that they were really focused on a fast start, and this is his words, to try and exploit the 5 day break factor. And as you say, George, I think that, the footy world's just got to come to terms with this and start, working out how to properly analyse it, because, that running factor is a really good point. The talk about, putting Trac forward was viewed as a tactical, genius move, but in all likelihood, the main driver of it is that he probably couldn't get up and down the ground properly, because he is the classic power athlete. He's not an anaerobic beast like Nibbler, who can back up from running 15 kilometres and 5 days later run 15 kilometres. Trac, would have been probably pretty useless as a mid in terms of his ability to repeat sprints or to do long 100-metre runs that he normally does. So what do you do with a power athlete? You put him up forward. It's what's been happened since time immemorial of footy. You put, when Lee Matthews can't run anymore in the midfield, he got chucked up forward, and the Trac's game was sensational. But yeah, totally right. They were really focused on exploiting that, and I think probably something that I would have loved to have seen them do, which normally Melbourne do well, and maybe this is credit to the Blues for not allowing us to do this and taking advantage of the momentum, but we never held the ball and chipped it around and took some of the heat out of the game. It felt really ballistic for that first 10 minutes, which probably, well, actually for the first 20 minutes, which probably played into the Blues' hand. And, again, they got some very clean looks and took their chances in normal circumstances, particularly when it's wet and raining, which doesn't even come into expected score, by the way. The weather doesn't come into it. So, that for them to score 5 straight in that first quarter and then score that first goal in the second quarter, which was a heartbreaker, that was sort of statistically pretty unlikely scenario. So, it definitely was as we talked about at the top, as Goody said, that's when we lost it. But to be honest, there was a lot of unlucky bounces of the ball, and we couldn't quite clunk some marks, and everything seemed to be rolling for them. But they were definitely the better side in the first quarter. They had they had a plan. They executed it really well. And I've talked about the 30-point margin a million times on the podcast. Very few teams lose once you get to a 30-point lead at any point in the match. Few teams lose from that point.
Except us. Still, that 48.
When did we lose with a 30-point?
That 48-point lead at three-quarter time against Essendon. A long way.
All right. Jeez, you really... when was that? That was 98. I was at that game on the top of the Ponsford when it was a concrete mausoleum.
Well, there's positives out of...
Salmon went nuts, didn't he?
Yeah, my when we were 40 seconds to go and we needed a goal, I thought, well, we kicked 3 goals in a minute in a grand final. 2 goals we can get.
Well, I can be blamed for that loss because I yelled out percentage halfway through the third quarter in the Bombers loss.
In the Bombers loss back in the day. Let's move on. And this one's for you, B-Man. Radish D says, "Hi, gents. Love the pod. I didn't get to watch almost any of the game, but it seemed to me that the 5-day break was an issue for us, hence the slow start. Once both sides tired out, we seemed to have the run of the game. Is that what it looked like live? Not too unhappy with the result. A win would have been better for sure, but I have to think that in another game and in a final with full breaks, we would be fitter and better team. The first quarter was bad, but I think it has to be considered an outlier rather than an indication of where either team is at. Do the panel agree? I'm sure B-Man does. I think B-Man's notion that each game is not a litmus test on flag credentials is especially important now. We've looked good in many games and looked bad in small stages. I think our best footy is right up there with probably the best 2 or 3 sides in the comp. The challenge for the Ds is delivering that consistently in September. The change to the red and blue print means that sometimes it might not quite all come together, which is not a problem in the month of May. We're growing and improving, and Goody always says that the team wins that the team wins the flag is not the best team, but the team that improves the most. I think we have that in us, Go Ds. And that's a new name that I haven't seen on Demonland before. Welcome to Demonland, Radish D. Thank you for listening. Binman, you've made this point about the notion of each game not being a litmus test on flag credentials. Can you give a thorough explanation of what that means, especially to people like me, perhaps who see the game in black and white, wins and losses? I get that we're in May and there's a lot of water to flow under the bridge between now and September, and the home and away season is all the preparation for that. The slow start this week cost us 4 points, very valuable 4 points against a team that we're competing against for a top 4 position. We do the same thing against an Essendon or a GWS or Collingwood 2 times. We've got to play them. Fremantle 2 times more, Brisbane, and against Port on the return fixture. Maybe your top 4 finish and the double chance goes begging. So you don't want to fail too many litmus tests on the run to the finals.
Well, none of them are litmus tests. I mean, so the short version of my comment about that is that we've been conditioned for a long time by the media and by the coverage of the game.
Are you talking about us as supporters?
Yeah, sorry, us as a collective, as footy fans, to view each week, each game as a game on an island that has, each game is for sheep stations. They pump it up, the media pump it up. It's been going on for in the 70s and 80s when it felt like that. There were 7 days. It was, each time was a gladiatorial contest. The coverage of the game hasn't changed, and Channel 7 and Fox don't want any talk about 5-day breaks. They don't want to talk about this game is actually not that significant in the scheme of things. They want each game to have some sort of incredible significance, and the way that they talk about it and the sort of reflexive discussion that happens every Monday is, well, what does that mean for a team's chances of winning the flag? 3 weeks ago, the Giants were lauded. You go on Demonland and everyone was saying they were the benchmark. I put a post up saying that we're the best, got the best list in the AFL, and someone laughed at it, said, oh, what about the Giants? And so I went through it and said, well, I still reckon. I went through the best 10 and the next 10 and made my case that was the best. But no, the Giants are the best team going. Well, what's happened to them? Now, are we writing the Giants off because of the loss on the weekend? What's that, 2 in a row, isn't it? Are we writing the Cats off, who have now lost 2 in a row? Some might. Are we writing Port off, who just beat the Cats because the Adelaide Crows beat them? Each week is not a litmus test or some sort of measure of a team's chances of winning a flag. Of course, the 4 points is super important. The purpose of the home and away season for a team that's in contention to win a flag is to finish top 4. That's it. Nothing else. And so each game is with a view to that future. And if you listen to, there's a real theme, you can hear it. If you go to Channel 7's app and go back to the win over the Cats, listen to the interview with Clary. I really love when Clary's interviewed because he doesn't sort of play into the media spin and he's really straightforward and really honest. And he just basically said that we've hit the last 2 finals banged up and not in the best place, and we've gone out straight set, so we're looking at it differently this year, and we want to be playing our best footy, not just our freshest and being physically ready. We want to be playing our best footy on the eve of the finals. It's that sort of idea that I've been talking about over the last few seasons, that it's about winning the war, not winning the individual battles. Of course, we would have loved the 4 points. We almost did. You could tell how frustrated Goody was. We had a clear plan. I have no doubt we had a plan to win the Port, then into the Adelaide game, the business plan they call it, business trip they were talking about. So that was a key focus. I have no doubt that they had the same focus in this game. Goody was furious that we didn't win, but in the scheme of things, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't mean anything. Of course you could say, well, what happens if we miss top 4 by the 4 points that this game? But who knows what happens between now and then? We've got another 4 months of football before we get to the finals. It's a media narrative. They want to play the game, that each game is a some sort of measure. But there's only one team left. That's the Swans, that you could argue that. All of the other teams, all of the so-called contenders, have lost games that if you apply the litmus test to each of those games and said, well, this will give them some sort of audit about their chances of winning the flag. Well, every other team other than the Swans has failed that test. Every team.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm not so much of the opinion that we're not, because we lost this game, we're not good enough to win it. I'm seeing it really in black and white that we didn't get the 4 points.
Yeah.
And those 4 points are important. It's an 8-point game to Carlton. We win that, and they're 2 games behind us. They're going to be up there competing with us for top 4.
That might be true 2 games out from the finals, of course. As soon as the closer you get to the finals, the more that comes into focus. But we've got, another 15 games for the home and away seasons? A million things can happen. 2 weeks ago, Geelong were unbeaten. They've now lost 2 in a row, and are they where are they on the ladder now?
I was never rating them.
But it doesn't matter. But you were never rating them, but all of the media was. They were flag favourites, and so it really, in the scheme of things, of course, it might come back to bite us. And we had the same conversation the last 2 years. In the last 2 years, it's exactly the same conversation, Andy. In the last 2 years, we finished top 4, regardless of your concerns about 8-point games and we're not going to make it. And what about if my auntie had a beard, or it's like.
Remember
it's so much to go. And going back to George's point, it's what I'm been talking about is the complete and utter blinkers the footy media and the footy world has got on about the importance of the high performance team and the program that they're trying to put in place. So if each game was a litmus test, then all you'd worry about is you wouldn't worry about the next game the week after or the one after that. You just throw all your eggs in the one basket and try to win that game. Everything, plan around winning that game. Well, what happens if we then go to West Coast and get beaten by the Eagles because we've thrown all of our energy to beat the Blues? Does that then suddenly mean, oh, hold on, we beat the Cats, we beat the Blues, we're definitely a contender, we're past the litmus test? Oh, no, we've been beaten by the Eagles. Good team wouldn't be beaten by the Eagles. A reminder, the Swans, who now was, 2 weeks ago, it was the Giants. Everyone was like, oh, I can't believe how deep the list of the Giants are. They're going to go, they're definitely flag favourites. They're the best team in it. So good off the halfback flank, yada, yada, yada. Now it's the Swans. The Swans got beaten by Richmond, who just got flogged by 90 points on the weekend by the Dogs. So did they fail a litmus test when they got beaten by Richmond? Like a good team doesn't get beaten by a team who then gets flogged by 90 points a few weeks later. So, I mean, do you know what I mean? It just gets absurd. So we've got so much to go in this season. So, of course, it was disappointing to lose. Of course, it would have been great to get the 4 points. I think we would have won if we didn't give up 5 goals in that first quarter. Exactly like Woody said, that's where we lost it. I have no doubt they set themselves to win the game. But it really, in the scheme of things, it doesn't matter. And if you are thinking it's a litmus test, well, do you rate Carlton? Do you think Carlton are a good team?
I think they've got some very good pieces. I don't think.
So do you think they're a contender?
But yeah, I do. I think.
Okay, they're a contender. They beat us by 1 point, Andy. One point. It's not like they flogged us by 40 points.
That we started the game slow in a game we should have 5 goals.
But we're talking about whether it's a litmus test, right? If it's a litmus test, they only beat us by a point. One of those poor decisions by the umpires in that game could have changed. One miss by the Blues. I was sitting right behind a couple of those shots in that first quarter. And what's his name? I think it was Curnow. For sure that was going to hit the post. At the last second, it deviated to miss the post. It doesn't deviate, we win the game or it's a draw, right? So, you know, if you rate the Blues, we almost beat them. So, you know, the scoreboard, if we just go on the litmus test, they're a 1 point better team than us. All right. Well, if they're a contender, we're a contender.
I think you're trying to put David King out of a job here, Binman.
Yeah. Can you imagine we do lose to West Coast? And it's a possibility.
We won't be winning a flag then, because each week is a litmus test.
Now, if we will not win a flag if we lose to the Eagles. Now, do you remember 2021, my famous ladder predictors? They had a doomsday scenario that we didn't even make the finals.
Yes, and we've barely been out of the top 4 for if you want a litmus test,
we're not a good team. I'm saying
look at the ladder. Look at the ladder. We're 6-3. We're 6-3. Is it 6-3? Yeah, 6-3 and 4th on the ladder. 4th, we're top 4. Like is our home. We don't. We have to get evicted to get out of the top 4. We've lived in the top 4 since the beginning of 21. So if you want a litmus test, look at the ladder. We've got a ladder. We've got a way of measuring where teams are. It's called a ladder. And we're currently 4th, which says after round 9, we are the 4th best team in the competition. That's the litmus test.
After that game on Thursday night, if you would have told me we were still going to be 4th after the round, I would have said
after the first quarter.
Yeah, after the first quarter, even after we lost the game. All right. Let's move on because we're going in circles. Midfield and the 5-day break. It talks about some kilometres, so I hope you've got some stats with you, Bin Man. Lakeside Oval, that's a poster on Demonland. Absolutely love the show, guys. I would like to discuss midfield performance post 5-day breaks. We have in the past heard how the midfield and high half forwards can cover huge kilometres in a game. We have tracking technology and individual player hot map data on ground coverage. My question is it known whether the midfield and high half forward collective distance covered is less or as expected post a 5-day break? The MFC game plan relies on two-way running, and my sense from the Blues game is that the runners look slower. Could Bimman's stats guru assist here? Should we have more players go through the middle each side of the 5-day break? So that's another new poster in the podcast thread. Thanks for listening, Lakeside. Bimman, do you have any numbers in the stats in regards to the distance covered by the mids, the half forwards, and I guess I'll add the wings to that group, that show any differential between a 5-day break and, say, a more regular 7-day or a 10-day break that we've had? Any of those stats?
Just taking that last question is about running different players through the middle, which is exactly what George said we did. So we had, even Langdon, I think, took a centre square or was it stoppages, but that's exactly what we did. And as George noted, we put our best runners into the middle. which is no coincidence. So it wasn't like, it probably would have been a planned process. So as for the data, it's a really good question. And you might remember last year, Andy, I called up and we played it on the show. I called up SEN and left or texted actually, and asked the question of Daniel Hoyne for that full-on footy analysis he does on Tuesday, specifically about that. Can we get some data around not on the 5-day break, but can we get some data that would shine a light on relative fitness between the two teams? And for me, the sort of data that would, is a good start to that is the kilometres run, the sprinting kilometres, the sort of striding kilometres that they talk about, that sort of data. And the answer, they read the question out on the show and we played it on here. The answer was that no, Champion data do not have access to that. The GPS data only the clubs have access to. So the shorter answer is no.
Yeah, don't we see that data? Sometimes they show us the 15.
We do. So if you go to the AFL app or the AFL on the web, on the PC, is that they have the tracking data, but they just show the record. So they kept all the records and they just show the top 5 in these categories.
That's
distance covered at total speed and high speed, speed, which is maximum speed, and average sprinting. And sprinting is, so maximum speed is reached by an individual player. Average speed is average speed across the whole game. Total sprints is total times a player has run above 24 kilometres for at least 1 second. Repeat sprints is amount of total sprints above 24 kilometres within 60 seconds of each other. Average speed in attack, and this is an interesting one. This goes to the question. Average speed of an individual player while their team has the ball, has the possession of the ball. Average speed in defence is average speed of an individual player while the opposition has possession. And total distance covered is it speaks for itself. Distance at high speed, distance covered by an individual player above 18 kilometres an hour indicates the amount of high speed running. Maximum speed, I mentioned before. Those figures tell directly that question, and a direct sort of indicator of fitness and their ability to cover the ground. The players have access to all of their own data. So for this data, they know exactly what data distances they cover in all of those categories in every match they play and every training session. Right? That's how significant that data is. So the answer to the question is no, I don't. But there was an interesting dialogue with Watson 11, who's been tracking some of this data himself by collecting it from the app. And so as for the 5-day break, there isn't any data that I can sort of look to. Champion data can't get access to it. AFL have got this data locked up because the clubs don't want to share it because it's critical IP for the clubs. So the clubs will not, apart from the top 5, right? So, but what I can tell you is that I've been looking at this. I've been looking at it for a long time in terms of just Melbourne on the tracker data. So we're almost always literally the top 4, top 5, usually the top 3 minimum in each of the categories that I just mentioned, almost always. And it's always those players that were mentioned. So the wingers, high half forwards in particular, they're the ones who cover the most distance, and they're the ones who dominate. They always dominate for us, particularly average speed in defence when they've got the ball. So that's how it looks most week. We dominate these numbers. This week off a 5-day break, in terms of total distance covered, Langdon 15.4. He ran 15.9 last week against the Cats. It may not sound a big difference, but every metre makes a big difference in particularly with a 5-day break. Then Tommy McDonald was second. Like Nibbler's normally second, and then Billings and our high half forwards. Tommy McDonald was 15.2. Then the next 3 players were Blues players for the total distance. High speed was even more anomalous for us. I'm saying anomalous a lot tonight. But Langdon again, he was ran 3.1 kilometres at high speed. But then it was Hollands, Cottrell and Akers for the Blues, which goes to George's point. And Caleb Windsor way down there in 5th. Maximum speed was Kincotta. Then Pickett, Langdon, Chandler, Neil Bullen. So that was better for us. But the average speed was Hollands. And normally it's always Nibbler, Neil Bullen, Sparrow, Walsh and Langdon. For sprinting, Langdon was number 1 for total number of sprints, 23, then Pickett. Then the next 3 were Blues players, and that one's almost always us. Repeat sprint was even more dramatic. So we had one player who had 4 repeat sprints, which was Cozzy. And then the next 4 players on the list of repeat sprints were all Blues. Hollands, Cottrell, Kemp, and Curnow. Work rate, this one's the one that they like to use as an evidence of work rate and ability to sort of really work hard. Average speed in attack. Normally we dominate this number. It was Walsh, which goes to George's point about Walsh's athletic ability and his running ability. His average speed in attack was 9.1 kilometres. Number 2 was Holland. And then for us, it was Howes, Bowie, Turner. Like normally it's Nibbler or sometimes, it's hardly ever Howes, although he's relatively quick, and Turner, one of our thingo. But this is the one that's really jumped out. With last week, for instance, this is average speed in defence. The top 5 players against Geelong for average speed in defence were all Melbourne players. In this game, the number 1 for average speed in defence was Wowie. Then it was Hollands for them, Neil Bullen for us, Chera and Holland. So 3 of the top 5 average speed and defence were Blues in this game. And then total distance, they ran 3 more kilometres than us over the entire game, 293 to 290. And we were dead even on speed. So then sprinting was much the same. But in the sprints, in the repeat sprints, they had 26 repeat sprints. We only had 21. And I don't recall us losing that particular stat before. So it's sort of a long way of saying is that, yes, I think it sort of makes sense that a 5-day impact would have a significant impact on our runners, on the players who are there for running. Because, on that list, we were missing a ton of our big runners. And the one that was been on the list all season in most of those categories that was nowhere to be seen except for one category in this game was Windsor. Which makes sense. A young player, we're asking him to back up 5 days with, no break. He hasn't been subbed off and he wasn't able to provide anywhere near the run, nothing close to the run. Like I said, he's normally on each of those categories I just read out. He's normally he has been in them, particularly the sprint ones, and he was nowhere to be seen. So, you could see just from those numbers that they were running better than us. If there was some way to measure physical strength in the contest, I think then we matched them, and one of them is contested possessions, and we smashed them in contested possessions and tackles. Well, not smashed them in contested possessions, but definitely in tackles.
Because we'll probably forget about it a bit later, just on Windsor, would you consider giving him a rest this week?
Well, I mean, it's sort of, it's sort of the conversation we have all the time. It's really interesting. It goes to the high performance. Partly it's my frustration is I don't know. I've got no idea because the media's job is to educate footy fans, and all I'm doing is trying to piece together the information I can, like a magpie find on the internet and bits and pieces here. I mean, it would be great if the media interviewed a high-performance manager. How many high-performance managers at other clubs other than Selwyn Griffith can you name? Other than Burgess at the Crows? I would argue that they're equally important as the coach in terms of a team's premiership chances, and we don't even talk about them. And so Geelong's a really interesting example. They do the opposite to us. They rest players, but Burgess never did. And we've seen the value of playing Clary half, injured since the beginning of the season, and same with Petty, playing him into form. And that's the way Burgess approached it, was to keep playing through and resilience. And it feels like that Selwyn Griffith has got the same strategy. So would you rest him? I don't know. I'm not a high performance sort of specialist. I don't think they will, if that's the question, because they haven't done. There's no history of them doing. They did flag that they'll give him a rest at some stage, but so maybe they will this week. Maybe he needs it based on those numbers.
Let's get into the umpiring. Bigfoot says umpires absolutely murdered us in the first half, 11-3. Freeze evened up throughout the rest of the match, but there were some horrible non-decisions that killed us. So don't get me started on this. I view Demons games through red and blue lenses, as we all do. So I invariably think that we're always hard done by. The Blues fans around me, they didn't think that the 11-3 count was fair at all. And I even heard some complaints that they had been killed by the umpires all season. But I didn't have the heart to inform them that going into this match, they had a differential of plus 32 free kicks. So the halftime differential of +8, took them to +40. Conversely, prior to this match, we had achieved parity in terms of frees for and against this season. We now sit -2 after this game, though. But it's the free kicks that you don't get, including when players stage and dive to the ground to force a dangerous tackle or force the push in the back. And that was a double whammy for us, probably a triple whammy, because ultimately it cost us an important goal. There was quite a few. George, I know you wanted me to rant about this. Anything you want to add?
You did a good job of ranting. The decision that really stood out for me, it's not so much about whether it was holding the ball or, should have been a throw, should have been this. The really telling one for me that absolutely cost us was when Pitternet was punched the ball out off from the ruck contest.
Maxie couldn't believe it.
Max couldn't believe it.
Is that a free if it comes off?
Yeah, you can't punch the ball over on the full from a ruck contest.
But it didn't come off Maxie.
It didn't come off Max.
Well, Maxie hit it into Pitney, didn't he?
No. That's the advantage of the watching on the television. It was Pitnet's fist in front. That's why Max was so furious. Pitnet gets a free and kicks the goal. There's the match there. What really annoyed me was that Williamson, the umpire, was standing right in front of it. You really couldn't tell in just looking at it who had actually hit it, but he made a decision. The decision he should have made was, I didn't see that, I can't tell, throw it in again.
Yeah, of course. That's the obvious thing.
Yeah,
and they looked confused.
Yeah.
Exactly. When in doubt, why not throw it in?
Yep.
Or go to the. I mean, they can't go to the vision. There isn't the rule. But that's a stupid thing about having that.
If there's doubt about it, don't call anything. Just throw it in again. Thanks very much. Off we go. That was the game. That scored the goal. They got the goal out of that won them the game.
We always get frustrated with the what do you call it? Deliberate out of bounds.
Yeah,
it's not deliberate. It's insufficient attempt.
Insufficient attempt, whatever they call it.
Yeah.
The one that got me on Thursday night was Viney was tackled as he's kicked it. He was tackled and then kicked it, and then it went out, and they call that insufficient intent.
It was crazy. I mean, really, it just drives me nuts. Like, I'm not.
If we're going to have.
It wasn't a factor in the result, so I'm not going to blame the umpiring.
Things like,
but the idea that their mistakes don't influence the game is just wrong. I mean, so I'm not blaming the umpires. I'm blaming the AFL for the ridiculous. There's so many. Forget the conversation that we've had the last few years of my view that there should be professional umpires. Forget that. The AFL. I cannot. I've said this before. Is that I've come to the conclusion the AFL deliberately keep opaque rules in the game because they get some benefit from the controversy that every week happens every week. And the obvious, there's so many sort of low-hanging fruit rule changes they could make that would make the job of the umpire easier. So the obvious one is the out-of-bounds one. We've been trialling it in the AFLW. Just bring it in the AFL. Just bring it in because it's like footy fans. What really drives footy fans nuts is the inconsistency in it. So there's that one, and then there's the other one is sort out the holding the ball rule, or just sort it out. There was a free kick where we got pinged for holding the ball. It seems like we're the only team in the AFL at the moment getting pinged for holding the ball. And just minutes before, Walsh gets tackled multiple times. And, I thought the rule was if you put your arm out to fend off and then get tackled and don't dispose, that's automatically a free kick. Well, he did it twice, and it was at a critical time. And then there were others, like there was, I don't know, I haven't looked at the replay yet. I plan to because I want to watch, that particularly the second half. But I was up in the Shane Warne stand right behind the goals on that sort of second level, so I had a great view of that last 30 seconds of the game. Trac was just getting completely dragged off the ball, like completely manhandled, and he threw a player to the ground, and the Blues fans went nuts. But that was because I was watching him; they were grappling him, and
they'd actually thrown him to the ground 30 seconds before.
Yeah, it was unbelievable, and like you've said, George, before, and you too, Andy, it's not the free kicks necessarily that get paid. It's the ones that don't get paid. The umpire's job is to make decisions. If they see a free kick, like that was such a clear free kick. He was being held before the ball was bounced. That's a free kick, full stop. Doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter that there's 30 seconds to go. And the implications of that is giving an opportunity for a team to win the game. Your job is to make a decision if a free kick is there. Just the final one on that is that the AFL, again, for a millionth time, have created a rod for their own back. And they're going to end up getting sued out of oblivion if they don't sort this. That, what was it, Kemp? That was right below me. That tackle was just the perfect tackle from Van Ruin, the absolute perfect tackle. And, of course, when it looked like it was it was play on and advantage and we got the goal, I was going ballistic or whatever, couldn't work it out, is Kemp absolutely put his head towards the ground. And so leaving that aside, I'm not blaming the umpires. There was a bunch more that, were dubious, I thought, and ones we weren't paid, particularly in that first quarter. But really, if the AFL is serious about head injuries, a player's going to have their neck broken because they're searching for a free kick. He should be fined for that. He should be suspended because he's putting his own, health and safety at risk by putting his head down. And you see 5, 6, 7 times around a footy, you see players doing exactly that, searching for the ground with their head, and someone is going to get their neck broken because of that action.
Can you prove that he was intentionally? You can say it was in the tackle. I couldn't do anything.
Well, can I prove it? Doesn't really matter because it wasn't even a dangerous tackle. It was a perfect tackle. So the moot point
whether you can prosecute that.
Well, they've got to stamp it out. They've got to find a way to not do it because this is what we were talking about last year. Is the AFL keep on making these bone-fisted decisions about rule changes with no thought of the unintended consequences of those decisions. And this is a classic unintended consequence of bringing in this sort of rule about sling tackles or dangerous tackles. The dangerous tackles was always there, without giving consideration to, are we going to create an environment where players are actually putting themselves at risk? And that's exactly what happened. And as I said, you see it more than 5, 6. You see it 7, 8, 10 times a round where players are searching for the ground in the tackle. And the other one that happens all the time is player going limp when they're getting tackled and allowing themselves to get slung. It happens, at least 4 or 5. Someone's going to get hurt, and it's on the AFL.
Let's move on. I think you might have touched on these. So just, B-Man, you tell me if you need to go into any more detail. I'll read them out. B-Man's PA, friend of yours, B-Man, were our centre stoppages setups too aggressive in the first quarter? Even when they started putting scores on us, we never really reverted to a defensive setup and continued to go for the clean breakaway clearance. Demonstrative asks, has the coaching moved too far away from stoppage/contested football? Is this the reason why Trac, Viney and Clary, although Clary had an injury and poor pre-season, are out of form? Our strong midfield has been consistently beaten too easily for the first time in years. I'm interested in Big Man's thoughts on how we can compete better in the contest and keep slingshot footy. The midfield performed better with Sparrow and A&B at centre square throw-ups. At the break of dawn, seconds this and asks, can you guys please have a robust discussion regarding our midfield? I don't want to hear pressure and tackling stats. I want to focus on pure ball-in-hand stuff because we've been poor all year except for 1 or 2 games. Big Man, your forte?
Well, I feel like I'm getting a bit fired up tonight, so I've been thrown another one. But Bimman's PA's question about were we too aggressive, it's an interesting one because if you look at it, it was amazing to watch. Both teams had free players all over and the same thing was in the Cats game. So it sort of goes to my point a little bit that I said earlier about these games are often used for trialling things for later on. So, going to the point about that litmus test, you don't trial things in a must-win game. We were clearly trying, so was Voss. They were clearly trying setups, in terms of different setups in the middle. Were we too aggressive? Well, they scored 5 goals. You could say it's a bit tricky though, because who's too aggressive? They would have come in with a plan. It's really difficult to get runners out there. 2 or 3 of those goals were pretty quick. The players have to follow the plan, that they're set out before the game. of course, you could get a runner out to go to, say, plan B or what it might look like, but really you've only got to quarter time to reset up your structures, which they seem to do. It's worth noting, too, that we scored 2 goals ourselves from clean stoppages. So it looked like we were trying to engineer clean stoppages ourselves, as the question suggested. Was it too aggressive? Well, scoreboard would suggest that, it was a factor in us losing, so perhaps it was for sure. As for the midfield, I found it really curious on Demonland, the criticism of the midfield in this game, and it depends what you're talking about. Are you talking about the midfielders individually as individual players, or are we talking about the midfield as a group? For a start, the game is moving away from clearances. It was last year. It is just no longer of course, you could point to this game and say, well, they scored 5 goals from the middle. But as I noted before, it was only, plus down 5 from stoppages. So you can't have, it's not all centre clearances. They're only, normally, teams don't score hardly at all from the centre clearances. This was an incredibly and not, strange match for 7 goals to be scored from out of the centre. But it goes to what Binman's PA is saying about how aggressive the setups were. That was a function. 7 goals from the centre was a function of both teams setting up really aggressively and rolling the dice. We rolled the dice and we lost on that. It's about the midfield as a group, so it depends what you're looking at. But stoppages and clearances are just simply not a key indicator that, of the same value it was 5, 6, 7 years ago. The game has moved to a turnover game. 60 to 70% of scoring is from turnovers. So the stats that relate to turnover, scores from turnover, stopping the opposition, scores from turnover, where those turnovers happen, are much more significant to football clubs now than clearances. As an example of that, so in the AFL at the moment, clearances, the best clearance team in the AFL from centre clearance is the Blues, then Collingwood, then Port. The team that's on top of the ladder, so what are we, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we're down in 14th. The team that's on top of the ladder everyone's raving about is Sydney. They're behind us. They're 15th in the AFL for centre clearances. For stoppage clearances, much the same. They're just above us in 10th spot, 11th spot. So we're in 12th. So, the best team in the AFL at the moment, only losing 1 game, is below mid-table and basically the same as us for both centre clearances and stoppage clearances. Up the top there, you've got Collingwood, who are outside the 8, Port, who were not in the top 4, Gold Coast to 4th, Essendon, North Melbourne, 6 for centre clearances. It just really isn't a stat that's, as significant as it was. Of course, it's important. Of course, you could point to the fact that Blues scored 5 goals from centre clearances. But as I just said, they're the best centre clearance team in the AFL, and they only scored 5 more points from stoppages than us. So, big tick. The big tick for the midfield in this game. The top rated, so again, for taking this particular match, I'm not sure why the mids copped it. The top-rated player from either team was Trac. Yes, he played forward too, but he still played through the middle and had crazy, I can't remember what his metres gained were, but I saw at one point it was 570, and that was in the third quarter. So a huge performance by him. Our next highest-rated player, so the rating is a really useful way because it measures impact. Disposal numbers are no longer really a useful indicator of anything particularly. They don't tell us anything. They just tell how many kicks someone's got. They don't tell us what they did with it. So the player rating looks at every single intervention a player has in the game and scores it out of 6 to arrive at the score. So our next highest and third behind Cripps was Jack Viney. Nibbler was 4th overall from both teams and 4th for us, who played through the middle. Clary was fantastic in the first half, absolutely fantastic, but he faded a little bit, but was still our 8th highest rated player. It depends whether you count Max in the midfield. Max was only our 6th best player, so he was down on the night, and yet our mids did well. As I said, the Blues are the best clearance team in the AFL. They only had 2 more clearances in total than us. So, if you look at that as a group, it's a very strong performance by that midfield group. Now, if you're looking at the players individually, one thing we have to remember, we lost Gus, one of our starting midfielders, before on the eve of the season. So we're not been able to replace him. Viney's been quieter for the last 3-4 weeks, but was almost our best player and was brilliant in the first 4 games. Oliver's numbers are amazingly good considering his limited preseason and that he played with a broken hand for at least 3 games, a sore ribs for one of those games, and the last 2 games post-surgery recovering from that. 2 minutes into the second, Oliver had the most disposals for us with 12. He had 3 disposals in the first 2 minutes of the second quarter. He was our best player, I think, in the first half. As I said, Petrarca, obviously played forward a bit, but was still powerful as a mid. So, yeah, I just don't see. I mean, of course, with losing Gus, that's been a big thing. And the other factor is we lost Salem. Salem was going to be playing through the middle a little bit, So I just don't buy that our midfield's down. We're not focused on midfields and clearances the way we have been, because we're trying to implement a new method, which is transition from the back half, high turnover, and those numbers match like the Swans. So the Swans are the best at the moment from coming from the back half, and Geelong as well. Geelong are way down below us on the stoppages and clearances. So really, winning clearances is no longer, or being a good clearance side is no longer sort of indicative of a premiership team.
All right. Let's move on. Scroll says, Trac had a few lackluster weeks in the middle, goes forward and kicks a bag of 5. Should we consider playing him up forward, considering his recent midfield form and our uninspiring key forwards? Another new poster on Demonland, Magnus, welcome Magnus, and thanks for listening, says, hi gents, following on from a comment the other week, does our forward line lack a captain? Should we be considering making Trac a permanent leader of our forwards? I was very impressed watching him at the game, and he was pushing instructions to the other forwards to move into different positions, etc. Maybe he should split his time like we do with Cozzy. So, George, what do you think about moving Trac forward on a permanent or semi-permanent basis? Last year, he went forward out of necessity, due to we had injuries to key forwards. So we had to adjust about the way we score. We don't have a lack of tall personnel this season, but we've had to make an adjustment on the fly this week, and it paid off. What do you think about him moving there?
I think we'll see. I think what we'll see is what was projected even a couple of years ago, moving him forward on it's not a permanent basis, but within the game. You probably noticed, when Richmond were there at their height, they'd be playing Dustin Martin in and out of the forward line, and he was lethal. I say he won 2 premierships out of the Richmond 3, all off his own boot when he was playing forward in particular. I think we'll see more of that of Trac. Our problem is you take Trac out of the middle to play forward. Who do you replace him with? We haven't got a great depth coming up behind. And he's almost irreplaceable in any case. So I think you'll see it tactically used within the game, but not so much on a permanent basis. I think we've got to solve our problem of long-term forwards. We might get a glimpse with Turner. JVR's filling his role. I don't know what else we're going to have in the next year or two. Hopefully the Jefferson experiment works, that we don't have to move Trac forward to get the regular goal kickers, but I think you'll see him more as an impact player up forward as needed.
We'll move on to the next one, which I think we've discussed, so I don't think we need to do it. Phil C, a big shout out to Wowie, was very clean and composed. Trac elevated to another level, which is hard to believe. Super proud of that comeback, so I'm surprisingly calm. My question concerns the forward structure. On TV, we seem to be very outnumbered in our forward 50 for most of the night. Were they keeping numbers back or just transitioning quickly? And I think, George, you mentioned how they play man on man. So I would have given the impression that everything was covered and it was full.
Yeah, and their mids move into the space in front as well, so makes it very, very hard for our normal forwards and the movements to be able to get some sort of freedom up there. All credit to them. That was well thought out.
And the other thing that they did, and they do a lot of, is they flooded back hard particularly in that last quarter. But the other big factor, Andy, was we were 71% time in forward half in that last quarter, for instance. That means the ball was continually re-entering into a super crowded forward line. So it's already crowded. As it goes back out, we've set up the wall, it comes back in. So look at that last sort of 2 minutes of footy. There were times there were 40, there were
Yeah.
34, 35 players inside the arc. So, that model was one of the reasons we're trying to shift away from it, because you're always re-entering the ball into a crowded forward line.
Lefty says that's 3 games in a row against the Blues that insufficient goal review technology has cost us the match. One day a team will lose a grand final as a result of Soviet-era tech. George, we've spoken about the inadequacies of the goal review technologies plenty of times, certainly in the podcasts immediately after our 2 last games against Carlton. Here we are again. We know that technologies are currently being tested. In the meantime, we have to put up with the image quality of a disposable camera. I saw someone write on Team Land. I agree with Lefty. Mark my words, a team will lose a grand final over this.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked about this before, and the very simple stuff. Is there any chance that we could get the cameras on both sides of the goal square, of the goal posts, for example?
For the goal line.
Yeah, so that you can see whether it's gone through the points, whether it's hit. Yeah, 2 more cameras would be welcome. What was even more interesting, there was a comment on Demonland, I think it was today, in the Footscray Bulldogs game, where they were doing a goal review to see whether it had gone over the line or not, but they weren't looking at the fact that it was actually touched. So one camera was looking at whether the ball got over the point, I think, or something like that. But it was obvious when they looked at the next camera that it had been touched, but they weren't looking. They didn't call for the review on whether it was touched or not. It was just whether it's over.
If they find something else, they can't act upon it.
Well, they didn't in this game, but that's the sort of stupidity that we've got at the moment. I just wish we'd in this present period that just let the goal umpires call be it. Just leave it at that instead of going back and forth, and they're not reviewing the points. There was a couple in the Port Adelaide Geelong game where it was suspected that goals had been kicked, but they were called points, but there's no review for points.
File that one under my conspiracy theory. I don't reckon it's even a conspiracy theory anymore. If the AFL, it's another one that's deliberately, the technology, we've got the technology, really the quality of cameras now, for them not to be able to, for instance, be able to zoom in close enough on that Steve May one. Again, there was another example of something that happened right below me, and it was hilarious to see. Like Steve May's expressions, like he was convinced, absolutely convinced. He was telling the players to set up for a point. He was sort of, he looked a bit pantomime and played it up a bit, but he looked legitimately shocked that it wasn't awarded a point. It's just ridiculous, really. The technology's there for that one. They've and as we've talked about, put the cameras in the post, or again, change the rules to hits the post and goes through. It doesn't matter for the for the point one.
MPC says, for a team that prides itself on contest and defence, how come we seem to struggle in the rain? We had Travy14 earlier mentioned that this was the best we had played in the wet for 4 years, and now MPC is contending that we struggle in the rain. Hasn't rained for weeks, and just our luck, the skies open up on Thursday. At the end of the day, both teams do have to contend with the weather. So, Bin Man, how do you think we handled the conditions as an improvement on some of the wet weather performances over the past couple of years or games that we've played in the wet?
Absolutely. A real pet hate a lot of Demons fans and on Demonland, that's for sure, is sort of the criticism of Goody of not adapting our game plan for wet weather. I think that, he's been bagged for that for ages. And I think this was an example, whether it's because of what we were talking about before, is that they decided to play a more aggressive forward half game because of, anaerobically, we didn't have run in our legs, and it was smart to do so, or whether they did adapt. The sort of reality is that wet weather footy is traditionally territory first, get it forward, deep inside 50, contest after contest, lots of tackles, which is exactly what we did. So on this occasion, we did adapt, although I don't know about you guys, but we still, right from the beginning of the match, tried a lot of high-risk, quick handballs that, particularly in the first quarter, didn't come off. A lot of them came unstuck, but, those little flick hand pass and sort of chained up. But, otherwise, it was very much a sort of wet weather game. I thought that was our best game of footy in the wet. Maybe it's helped by having Billings, and by the way, George Billings played. So I can't recall if we had a bet, and I think it was dinner, wasn't it, that on Billings?
No, that was only after the event you added that part.
So, maybe it's a function of having better kicks inside and more skill. Langdon looks a different player this year. He looks like he's up and running, and his kicking's improved out of sight. So it was definitely, I think, our best performance in the weather. When the rain came, I thought, the 6 goals down after 2 minutes of the third and the rain's coming down. I'm thinking, oh, my God, everything that could go wrong in this game is going wrong. The umpiring, the weather, it was like, oh, my God.
My weather app said 0% chance of rain.
So, right. Yeah, I didn't know. And so that's the other thing about the planning for this game is that I was checking the weather all week, and they wouldn't have planned for a wet weather game. So I think that it was a good example of us either adapting because that's the game plan we came in with, or let's play credit to Goody and that he did adapt. It was the best we've played in the wet. We kicked, we came back from a 38-point margin in the wet. It's no mean feat. We won that style of footy, that front half footy, as I noted it at the top in the stats file. That was evidenced by winning the inside 50 count, territory battle, winning time in forward half, winning the tackle counts. But the other thing is, it's a bit of a thing I think we need to consider this, is that a key reason Goody doesn't like to make big changes to his method, to our method week to week, is we're such a system-based team. But it's no small thing to play one way and then try to implement a new back half transition method, and then flip to another, method, even if it is even if it is previously a method that we've been using for the last 2 or 3 years. It's that's no small thing to do that from a game 1 week to the next, and so it would have taken them a little while to sort of get used to that old system, if you like. And as you pointed out, the forecast was for no rain, so they wouldn't have planned it for it to be so wet, likely not trained for it. And so I was shocked, as I said, but when it started raining before the game, I thought it was condensation coming off the grandstand roof because, I wasn't even expecting rain. So, it rained for a big chunk of the game. When it did dry up a little bit, we then sort of did revert to a bit of a halfback game. We tried to spread the ground a bit more. We were sort of switching across the ground. We bounced off halfback better, and we reverted to sort of a hybrid forward half game and a little bit of that sort of element that we did against the Cats, and that's transition game, as probably evidenced by 26 points from the defensive half is not a huge amount under our season average.
NPC chimes in again with something that caught my ear in the interview with Max on the club website. He mentioned we have struggled the past few times against big Melbourne clubs, assuming Carlton and Collingwood. I find we play really well in interstate hostile environments. However, when it's our home ground but we are outnumbered by the louder opposition crowd, I wonder if it's a mental thing that plays on the player's mind at all, like big club envy, even at a subconscious level. Do you think there is anything to it? We've got a wonderful record on the road in recent years, playing in front of some extremely hostile crowds. You only have to go back a few rounds to see the 2 Adelaide games. George, surely crowds in Melbourne isn't a factor to explain away losses to bigger Melbourne clubs.
I don't think so. I think looking at this through the benefit of recent positions, Carlton and Collingwood happen to have been pretty good sides. There's a reason why we might be seen to struggle against them. Is because it will be a good game. It will be a close game. They're good sides. So the crowd factor, I think, is more important in the way that it influences umpires, particularly about not calling certain ways. I was watching a game recently. I was in Adelaide. It was an Adelaide game. I can't remember who was playing, but the number of times that calls were simply not made because the crowd was silent when it should have been holding the ball against their home sides. So, I think that's the only influence that happens. But I don't think we're overawed at all by who we're playing. It just happens that in recent times they've been pretty good sides, the big ones.
The only thing I'd say is that so frustrating, another close loss to the Blues. But if you look at not the final because we started well, but if you look at say the last three games against the last one against the Pies and the last home and away season game, or the last two home and away season games against the Blues, in all three games they jumped us at the beginning, and perhaps it's partly to do with Miss Bargonicus's sort of discussion around how we sort of ease into the game, and teams are sort of alert to that and they're looking to jump us. But this game was almost the carbon copy. If you go back to the infamous point game, where it was touched, not touched against the Blues last year, it was equally, funny night, wet, tough physical game that we ended up grinding it out. I reckon I meant to go back and look at it, but I suspect the numbers are almost identical on things like time and forward half and tackles, and we dominated the last three quarters of that game. It was identical in this game, or it was actually the second half in this game, but in three of the last four games against the Pies and the Blues, we've had a shocking start. It's obviously something that they'd be looking to address. We don't want to have to start a final 4 or 5 goals down.
Oh, you're on board with me not wanting that to happen to us in the final. Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry, I forgot that I said that. But just in case, there's not a question about Trac. I mean, what a game by Trac. And I just wanted to say one of the...
He goes forward, but yeah.
One of the funniest things of the footy for a long, long time, and where I was sitting, we were on level 2 behind the goals in the Shane Warne stand at the punt road end. And there was a Carlton fan almost directly above us, not quite above us, but around a bit, who was yelling like at the top of his lungs, like so loud you couldn't believe it. It was amazing that he got through the whole match. But for 2 hours of game time, he was yelling, screaming like so loud that everyone could hear it, "Christian, you suck." And I'm sure there's listeners who could hear it, but like literally, like screaming it so loud, "Christian, you suck." And even Blues fans were yelling at him to shut up. But it was actually ended up being quite funny because Christian Petrarca went bananas, and it was right below us. I think 3 of his goals were directly below us, and a couple of them were directly after he was screaming, "Christian, you suck." It was like one of the best individual games from a player. It would be right up there in my top 100 of individual games. It was incredible by Petrarca. So it was quite comical because, he clearly didn't suck. But it was quite a bizarre experience. And the other thing I had to say about the Blues fans is that they should be called the Booze fans.
Oh.
I mean, they just were booing free kicks for the entire match. And it was like, and it does my head in when people boo, like call holding the ball when a player kicks it or handballs it. It's just so frustrating.
Jane02 says, "Hi guys, very disappointed with the result and ordinary umpiring, but impressed with the team's comeback in the last quarter. My question is, in retrospect, was it an error to bring back Bowie back in after such a long layoff? I haven't been able to determine if he wasn't quite right or if he was subbed off as he was having no impact. Also very impressed with Woden's performance. Surely getting a full game into him next week is the way to go. Keep up the great work. Your podcast get me through my long drive to Melbourne each week, and always lots of good food for thought." So, B-Man, your thoughts on Jake Bowie's game? Last week, I accidentally left out a question that we had about Wowie and how he had risen to the task of playing in defence after he was thrust into that position in the absence of Salem and Bowie. So did we rush Jake back this week, given his 8-week layoff, and considering that Wowie has been growing into that halfback role?
Look, I'd say no. I mean, I listened to, as I was sitting in the drizzling rain at the game, Mick Walder was interviewed on the radio beforehand and was asked, exactly that question of you're rushing him back 8 weeks, and he said, "No, he's good to go. We don't bring anyone back who's not good to go." So, they knew all of his numbers. He had met all his targets. They were 100% confident he was good to go. But as I said, part of our philosophy is we brought back Petty when he was clearly not 100%. Exactly the same with Oliver when he wasn't 100%. It's one of the sort of themes of, or one of the common practices of our high performance program is, I suspect, a big part of the thinking was, I mean, he's a excellent player. He's an elite ball user. You just need your best players in footy. If you want to have a litmus test, you've got to have your best players in the team. And he's such an important player with his ability, particularly with Salem out. You know, you can't rely on Judd McVie being the one player in the back half who is an elite kick. We need three, 2 or 3, and Bowie's definitely one of them. I actually haven't looked at his numbers, how well he played. Doesn't surprise me he got subbed off. So, you know, it's hard to say they wouldn't have brought him in if they didn't think he was ready, would be my feeling, or that he didn't think he could make a contribution. I don't know about you guys. He looked okay to me. I didn't even check his numbers, to be honest.
The only thing I'd add was watching it on the television, he looked quite distressed when he was subbed off, physically distressed, like he'd done something to the shoulder again or the collarbone.
He might have got a stinger.
It might have got something, yeah. So I can't add anything more than that.
Yeah,
the other thing too about bringing him in is fresh legs. I mean, before the game, I wrote on Demonland that I don't bet on D's games, but if I was advising a neutral, it would be just leave this game well alone because there's just too many variables. One of which is they brought 4 players in. Will that help them with their freshness given their recent compressed schedule? One, what's the influence of Bowie? One of the other variables is what's the influence of the umpires going to be, what's luck going to be, what tactical approach. So, it's hard to say really, isn't it, was the right thing. I mean, he's a better player than Wowie at this stage of his career. So, if he's fit and they think he's ready to go, bring him in all day, every day.
Mind you, when Wowie came on, I was rather impressed with him. He was clean with the ball, providing.
That's true, and it's quite physically sort of dynamic, wasn't he?
Yeah. What was interesting, we'll talk about the Casey game, but he played the next day for Casey, which was remarkable. I don't know why they've done that.
Load management, George.
I absolutely don't know why. After playing a quarter and
for that reason, to get the loads up.
Yeah, but interesting.
OMID says, I was really impressed by Langdon's game. Was used differently than usual by Goody, given Trac played mostly forward, but I thought he was really effective. So I reckon Langdon's almost back to his 2021 best. Ever since, when we mentioned it a while back, since he's cracked ribs, I think 10 rounds into 2022, struggled to be as effective as he was in the premiership season. And then when Hunter arrived on the scene, he had to change to a more defensive role. But I think this season we're seeing a lot of similarities in the way that he's used as in 2021, George.
Yeah, absolutely. This is Ed Langdon back to his absolute best. He seems to be in everything at both ends of the ground, which is exactly what his major benefit is over other wingers in the competition. He's just relentless. You really can't add any more than that. The number of times that he saves goals down one end and he seems to be at the other end, contributing to forward thrusts. He's just remarkable. I don't know if he was on Hollands, but he certainly gave him, I think, a bit of a bath in terms of how a winger should play, although Hollands still plays pretty well. But, all credit to Ed. I think we're seeing the best of him, having come back from that rib injury. And once again, people shouldn't underestimate the effects of injury on particular players. And in his case, someone who's a runner, having his ribs cracked, doesn't do him very much good, but now that he's overcome that, certainly back to his best.
It's a good point. I mean, it's an excellent point. I mean, he was just not the same player last year, was he? And I agree, Andy, he's back to his very best. And what I really like is his kicking had fell away completely last year after I was pumping him up big time in 22. But he's, after that rib injury, he was never quite the same player, but also his kicking fell away. But his kicking's been excellent so far this season again, and smart. So often it's like a Langdon special where he gets trapped on the boundary, but his ability to put it back, sort of laterally towards the goal square is sort of almost like a Langdon signature now. And his running power, just watch him for 10 minutes, put the binos on him and just watch him. He's incredible.
Let's get into we'll go very quickly through the Casey game, because from all the reports, I didn't watch it. I've got a brief summary here, but it sounded like it was quite unwatchable. In a grueling and excruciating to watch match that could have easily ended in a tie, the Casey Demons secured a narrow victory over Carlton. Young forward Matt Jefferson opened the scoring, while Carlton Thaltrop's mid-quarter 2-goal burst, including a remarkable one from long range, was crucial. Skipper Mitch White also stood out, particularly with a pivotal goal before half-time. Carlton, on the other hand, relied heavily on just a couple of standout players who drove most of their game. And despite trailing early, Casey managed to come back thanks to Bailey Laurie and a consistent game from Lockie Hunter, who alongside Adam Tomlinson topped the team with 24 disposals each. Ben Brown emerged as a second-half hero for Casey. Although his kicking was inconsistent, his efforts contributed significantly to the total, booting 2 goals, 6. The match itself turned into a low-scoring, tough contest by the end, with Casey pulling ahead to clinch the win by 3 points. George, did you watch any of the game?
Yeah, watched about half the game, and a few of the one of the most boring games you could possibly watch. It was awful. Not surprising. This was VFL level. 15th on the ladder versus 17th. I think it was.
Where are they? They're 17th or 15th.
Yeah.
And I think they only had 2 or 3 AFL listed players or something.
2 AFL listed players. I think we had 7, but it was just an awful game to watch. It was just mistake after mistake. The Ben Brown 2 goals 6 normally would have kicked 6 goals 2, because most of those shots were Ben Brown specials. The 45-metre run up, kicking from 40. He just kept on missing him. He didn't seem to be able to put him through the middle. Interestingly, Shaki didn't play at all in this game.
Well, he was named in the injury list last week with an Achilles as a test. He pulled out of the week before, and we weren't sure whether that was a holdover just in case.
Yeah, that's right.
But he was in the injury report as an Achilles for a test, so assuming he didn't get over that test.
No. What was interesting, though, was I think that freed up Jefferson a lot more. Instead of having Fullerton, Shaki, Ben Brown competing in the forward line for him, but Jefferson certainly played a better game this time. Still a long way from it, but that's what he needs in terms of his development. Hunter, lots and lots and lots of possessions. Didn't really have a great deal of influence in the game, unfortunately, from what I saw. You're playing a team that's 17th. You should be really cutting it right up to pieces, and
with no AFL listed players.
So you really couldn't take much away from this game. Tolstrup, I thought, was good in patches, really good. You could see the talent there. There was a couple of goals that he was the result. He started it in the middle or started it further up the field to be able to score. Mitch White won the game for them. Absolutely turned it around with a couple of really telling possessions. We're not going to do much in this season as the VFL side, simply because we're missing all those good second-tier plays that we lost from the previous years. Probably White's one of the few decent ones remaining when we lost Moose and a couple of others, Bell as examples, but they're well down from where they were.
And you take out Dunstan, you take out JJ, James Harms, and then the guys like Howes, the guys that have made the step up into the.
That's correct.
JBR's not there anymore. Howes, Woden, Laurie are out, in and out.
Two comments and a question I'll go the questions first. Is I guess the players that Jefferson's the one that a lot of people are focusing on in terms of will he come good? It's good to hear that he's been a bit more in the game in the last couple of weeks. But leaving him aside, George, there's 2 players. So this is the comment, and then the follow-up question is that 2 players that concern me in terms of where they're travelling, but I think they're important players. Or should be important players for us, given the roles they play, but they're not going to that next level, which really worries me, is Seston and Moniz Wakefield. How did they go?
Seston, almost the same as the last couple of weeks. shows a few things here and there. I don't think when he first arrived at the club, I don't think he had any tank whatsoever, and he's had to really build. He's playing midfield. I don't know if that's his best role necessarily, and he's not going to be able to break into the midfield in the seniors in any case.
I might just want to get him near the ball.
But because we've lost the people like the Dunstans and the Harms and that in this side, he's being forced to play in the middle. He's doing all right. I think he's got enough basics there to be able to build something, but it won't be this year that he's going to break out by any stretch. Who was the other one?
The other
AMW. I just don't know what they're going to do with him. He seems to get a lot of the ball, but not really have any influence on the game.
He came in as a small forward option, and we need a second. We've got sort of relatively good coverage, but a sort of Cozzy style, close to goal, small forward.
Yeah, from what I've seen, they're playing him more across the half back line.
Yeah,
they are at the moment. Yeah,
yeah. So again, where do you fit him in? I don't know that he's going to fit into the half back line or the forward line at this stage, but difficult to say.
All right. Well, given it's a Sunday and at the time of recording, we haven't heard from the club or our high performance manager in terms of any injuries, except one we heard on the news tonight. JVR has entered concussion protocols and will not be playing in Perth this week. So we know he's not going to play. So that's one change.
So when did that happen? In the match, presumably.
Yeah.
George, you said during the match he's
Channel 9 showed it. I think it was he came out of the goal square to try to take a diving mark and hit. I think it was behind his knee.
Right.
And then obviously after the game he's had symptoms of some sort.
What quarter was that in, George?
I don't know. I think it was.
He was off the ground for ages, and I thought he'd been subbed off because he was off the ground so long. So I wonder whether he was having the HIA test or whatever it is.
Yeah. Anyhow, he's out for the next 12 days at least.
Right.
So that's him. Salem was listed last week as still 1 to 2 weeks away, and given that he's recovering from a hamstring injury, I think we can safely assume that he won't be travelling to Perth. So given all that, and after our second 5-day break in 5 or so weeks, we now have a 10-day break from last Thursday till next Sunday. What changes, boys, or if any? Well, we know there has to be one. JVR is not going to be playing. Other Demons liking to make Bin Man, followed by George, who comes in.
Well, I was going to go with no change for sure, but obviously JVR. That's interesting because that's a problem, isn't it? Is it? We need a second ruck. Is this? George's. I haven't watched hardly any of Casey. I have to say. The obvious one, just from what George has said in terms of performance in the last few weeks, is Varel to come in. I think this is would be a great opportunity. We can't be flogging Maxi for 90%. This is, although he loves to, McWalter said that in that interview, is that he's a player who just loves to be in the ruck all the time and you're not dragging him out of there. But, Petty didn't take a single centre square bounce. It was all JVR in this game. Petty took, I think, 6 or 7 or 5 or 6 around the ground stoppages, but he's got no technique in the middle. So, I can't see them using him, to be honest, as the second ruck. They might. You've got to bring in another forward. It's not going to be Shaki if he's not playing. It's definitely not going to be Jefferson yet, is it? So, who does that leave? I'm not entirely sure. I guess you could bring Tomo in or Ben Brown. There you go. But you could bring Ben Brown, but it still doesn't solve the second ruck dilemma, does it?
No.
You could bring Tomlinson back in and throw T-Mac forward potentially. It still, again, leaves the dilemma about who the second ruck. So maybe this is the perfect opportunity to bring Varel in and have him play forward. It's where he's resting forward, isn't he, at Casey? He's rucking and resting forward.
Yep.
It doesn't sound like Fullerton is really in the frame at the moment, to be honest.
But I don't know the ins and outs, but at the end of the game, in the very last minute, Fullerton, they said, might have done a knee injury of some sort.
Right. Well, he wasn't mentioned in the I'm not sure. Was he mentioned an injury, Andy?
Not in the injury report, but not in the match report. But that doesn't.
But he hasn't been doing enough, has he?
No.
I mean, I haven't seen him, but that's from what I read on Demon Land. He hasn't made a case for senior selection. So it'd be shocking if it was. I'd be shocked if it was him. Could you see them Varel coming in, George?
Yeah, and West Coast don't have a strong rucking division as well, so it's a perfect opportunity, I think, if they were to go that way. But Ben Brown's the obvious easy forward replacement. But who do we need the second ruck, or do you just pinch hit with a T-Mac every now and again?
Pinch hit with a T-Mac, yeah. So I mean, I guess you're right. Probably the logical thing would be Ben Brown if they think 10 days between this game. Plenty of, although do they want to put the big fella on a plane and fold him into a pretzel? I don't know. But I'd love to see Varel get a run.
Yeah.
It's always great to see juniors. The other thing is McGovern was hurt today. I'm not sure if he's going to come up, but he was a bit proppy.
Let's just start the preview bit, and then you guys can add in. George told me there were a few players for the Eagles that might not be playing. The D's will travel interstate for the third time this season when they travel to Perth to play the Eagles at our home away from home Optus Stadium, the site of our drought-breaking flag. Despite a few close games, a few close competitive games and back-to-back victories in mid-April, the Eagles were widely tipped to join the Kangaroos as cellar dwellers this season, and have been very inconsistent this year and have had a few thumpings. And to add insult to injury, they have a large injury list. It will be very concerning if the Demons don't dispatch the Eagles with ease. But stranger things have happened. George, followed by Big Man, your preview of the match. George, you have some updates on their injury list.
I watched the Eagles Collingwood game today. It was a bit like witches' hats, quite frankly. Collingwood
scored the first goal, Eagles.
Yeah. And Collingwood by the end of the game had one player on the bench. So they were down three players effectively, and so they still convincingly overran them. Eagles were in it for a quarter, but Collingwood were just simply far too good for them. That they already had Waterman out, who's still listed 1 to 2 weeks. Yo was out this week, 1 to 2 weeks. So both of those would be doubtful perhaps for next week. McGovern was taken to hospital with, they called it internal injuries, but I suspect it's broken ribs.
It says here, I'm just reading internal injury. It's like a broken heart. I've had one of them before.
He basically landed on his own arm after going up for a mark. Looked like he's broken the ribs from this. Darling might be subject to an MRO review because he ran into
broken nose.
Well, a broken nose, but he also ran into who was it? One of the Collingwood players, I can't remember, who was concussed as a result of the collision. So it'll be interesting to see whether he has a question to answer there. Petruccelli did an ankle as
the
well.
Detective.
Yep. So that's potentially three more players out of their side that was already decimated. I can't see them being any real threat, but for this game, it might be an opportunity for us. Do we give Windsor a break with a 10-day break? Salem must be very close in any case, and maybe that's an opportunity to bring him back in as well. So Woden for Bowie for Woden.
It's a fine line, isn't it, between paying respect to opposition and taking the opportunity to. The other thing they can do is to, speaking of load management, is that even someone like Clary, they could, use this break to 10 days. Maybe they could load up the players in this period and almost it would be disrespectful to call it bye, but the thing that West Coast have been good at in the last few weeks is their contest. Like they're number 2 or something in the AFL for ground ball gets. Their contest has been great for most games, but it just completely fell away by the look of it in that game, George. I didn't Howe was off groin for the Pies. They got a concussion. So that, as you say, they had 3 on the bench, 3 out. So, for that game to be a blowout is a bad sign for Eagles. But when you take out the players that they've lost from that team anyway, but the sort of concern would be their contest fell away. But at home, they'll come out. They'll be focused on the contest. I'm really hoping it's an opportunity for us to see us playing out sort of a high octane transition game, and hopefully we can really take that opportunity to sort of practice under match conditions, fast transition from the back half with McVee and hopefully Bowie delivering the ball out of the back half, and really sort of getting on our bikes. Percentages, you talk about the end of the year, Andy, it was massive from a percentage perspective. We wouldn't be 4th if we didn't fight back from 38 points. We would be 5th. And so we get the one crack at West Coast, speaking of playing teams once. We want to take advantage of it.
We played them twice? No.
Oh, do we play them twice?
I think
that'd be brilliant if we get to play them. So I just assumed, actually.
We play them again in Melbourne.
Right, well, that's great. I mean, so if they're weakened at the moment, don't just rack up a high score, as I've talked about tons of times. Is the best way to get a high percentage is to keep the opposition to the lowest score as possible and win by a big margin, not to score as much as you can and create an open, free-flowing game where both teams score. We want to keep them under 30, 40 points and then hopefully score 100-plus points ourselves. Looking forward to it. It's a bit weird though, isn't it? Because Thursday night and we're not playing till Sunday week at 6 p.m. It's like I'm really looking forward to getting this sort of group of games out of the way, or the first 9-10 games out of the way, because after that we go back to week for a while, and I'm looking forward to a bit better rhythm than Thursday nights. I'm not a fan of Thursday night football. I've decided it's throws out the weekend, and I'm not a massive fan of a 6 p.m. Optus game, but at least we'll have something to look forward to over the weekend.
So we play the Eagles at the MCG in round 17. It's the first time we will have played the Eagles at the MCG since when?
Since a game that I remember where we got beaten by.
Yeah, we did.
Oh, God,
Andy, what is it?
2014.
I remember getting late to that game and they were already 3 goals up.
Well, that was almost another time where we didn't score in the first quarter. We scored 1 point in the first quarter.
I don't think they were that good that year either, were they?
I don't know, 2014.
So we've forgotten that. We've erased those years from our memories.
The forecast is, I'm not sure why my computer's showing Fahrenheit. It's 80 degrees Fahrenheit on Sunday when we play them. Minimum 15.
It's 27 during the day, but then by the time we play them, I think it's 4 o'clock their time. It's down to about 24 and it's cloudy. I think it's
perfect. There won't be any dew. There'll be no, what it says here, slight chance of a shower.
I didn't have it. It said no precipitation on my app, but then again, my app last week let me down.
Yeah, I'm looking at BOM. It says partly cloudy, slight chance of a shower, winds northeasterly 15 to 25 kilometres, chance of any rain 20%, 15 minimum, 26 maximum. 6 p.m. What time is it over there?
About 4 or 10. 4. I think it works that way. All right, boys. We're going to leave it there for tonight. We'll be back next week. If you want to listen to the show live, please head on over to demonland.com on Monday night at 8:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewer on Apple Podcasts. Thank you, Felinophobe. Thank you to our posters on Demonland who submitted questions and comments. They're an integral part of the show. So thank you to Monocular, Palace D, Smurf, Demonic Final Fantasy, Travi14, D Old Fart, Radish D, Lazy, What Say What, Lakeside Oval, Bigfoot, Bidman's PA, Demonstrative, At the Break of Dawn, Scroll, Phil C, Lefty, MPC, Jane02, and Oh My Ds. And thank you to my two co-hosts, George and Bidman. Thank you to you, our loyal listeners. And don't forget, leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts, and we'll read it out on next week's show. Go Demons!
Red Leggers.